Welcome in, everyone. I am so thrilled you're joining us for today's explainer. We're going to be unpacking a truly beautiful, deeply moving autobiographical story by Sudha Murty. It's called How I Taught My Grandmother to Read. And, this isn't just some simple childhood memory. It's a profound look at a 62-year-old woman literally reclaiming her independence, her dignity, and her voice. I was not independent. I was dependent on others. Just let the weight of that sink in for a second. This single, incredibly powerful realization of utter helplessness from the grandmother, that's the spark. That is exactly what ignites this entire life-changing journey. It's that light bulb moment where she realizes that without literacy, she isn't truly free. Now, to really understand the stakes here, we've got to travel back in time a bit. I want you to paint a picture in your mind. We're in a small village in North Karnataka during Sudha's childhood. Right? So this is an era way, way before the internet or instant news. Actually, transport facilities were so poor back then that even the weekly magazines would arrive late. In this kind of nostalgic, slow-paced setting, the arrival of a weekly magazine wasn't just, getting the mail. It was a highly anticipated, prized event. It was literally their main connection to the outside world. Okay, let's dive into this and meet the key figures of our story. First up, we have our narrator, Sudha, who was just a 12-year-old girl at the time. Next is Krishtika, affectionately known as Ava. She's Sudha's 62-year-old grandmother. She's incredibly hardworking and loving, but she is entirely illiterate. And finally, we have Triveni, who is a really famous Kannada writer. The deep, super affectionate bond between this young, literate granddaughter and her illiterate, but incredibly eager grandmother, well, that's the beating heart of this whole story. So you might be wondering, why was that weekly magazine such a big deal? Well, it was all because of a story called Kashi Yatre. This was a serial novel written by Triveni, and they'd publish it just one episode at a time. Because Ava, the grandmother, couldn't read, she had this very specific weekly ritual. She relied completely, and I mean entirely, on 12-year-old Sudha to read the latest episode aloud to her. She'd wait eagerly for it all week, savoring every single word. And honestly, she became deeply emotionally attached to the characters. Let's trace how this incredible journey actually unfolds. We start out with that comfortable childhood status quo, that weekly reading ritual we just talked about. But then we hit a roadblock. Sudha is absent for a week. And that absence, that is what triggers the grandmother's radical decision to learn to read at the age of 62. Which eventually leads us to a beautiful, totally triumphant climax on the festival day of Vijay Dashami. So let's look at that inciting incident. Young Sudha leaves for a neighboring village to attend a wedding, and she ends up staying away for a whole week. And naturally, during her absence, the beloved magazine arrives. But the grandmother, she can't read a single letter of it. I want you to just imagine that feeling for a second. For the very first time, she experiences this painful, crushing realization of her own limitation. She is entirely dependent on a child just to access the story she loves. Let's move to Dixie and see how this builds. Because she absolutely doesn't just sit back and accept her fate. No way. Her path to literacy kicks off with that harsh realization, but it's followed immediately by pure, undeniable determination. Next comes the hard work she puts in with a mentor, and remember, that mentor is her 12-year-old granddaughter. Talk about a role reversal. And finally, all of this leads to her achieving true, hard-won independence. All of this incredible hard work leads to a truly breathtaking emotional climax. You see, her self-imposed deadline was the festival of Vijayadashmi, and on that exact day, the grandmother actually achieves her goal. She reads a book completely independently. But then, she does something absolutely extraordinary. She reaches down and she touches her 12-year-old granddaughter's feet. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the immense cultural weight of that action. In Indian tradition, touching someone's feet is a gesture of deep, deep respect. But here's the catch. It is typically reserved for elders or for teachers to seek their blessing. By touching Sudha's feet, the grandmother completely flipped those traditional age dynamics upside down. She wasn't honoring her young granddaughter as a child. She was honoring her strictly as a respected teacher who had spread the light of knowledge. It gives me goosebumps just thinking about it. Moving right along to our next section, themes, meanings, and symbols, deconstructing the journey. Let's dig a little deeper into what's happening beneath the surface of the story. If we contrast her psychological state before and after this journey, it's like night and day. Before learning to read, she was entirely defined by dependency. She felt utterly helpless and reliant on others for basic information. But after After learning to read, she is independent, she's confident, she's empowered and self-reliant. Literacy didn't just give her a practical skill to read a magazine, it literally gave her back her dignity and her self-respect. And you know, this text is incredibly rich with sub-themes too. Beyond the obvious ones like lifelong learning and determination, it crucially reflects on women and education. This story is a mirror to a harsh historical reality where many women in earlier times were simply denied educational opportunities altogether. Yet, through this incredibly sweet family bond, the story shows us how sheer determination can absolutely shatter those historical barriers. Sudha Murty does an amazing job of elevating a simple childhood memory into a profound lesson using some really beautiful symbolism. For instance, the physical book itself represents knowledge. The act of literacy, that represents absolute freedom and independence. And the festival, Vijayadashima, isn't just a random date on a calendar. It beautifully symbolizes new beginnings and the pure joy of learning. The story is also remarkably engaging because of how it's told. The first-person narration, using the word I, makes the emotional stakes feel incredibly intimate, like we're right there with them. We get this vivid imagery of a summer night with a full moon, the clever use of flashbacks to pull us straight into the past, and just brilliant characterization of a humble, loving, yet fiercely determined grandmother. Now I want you to think about this for a second. Why did the grandmother feel more helpless when she couldn't read the magazine than during other major physical difficulties in her life? Well, it's because illiteracy creates a very unique, very invisible type of mental dependency. Physical hardships are undeniably tough, but having a mind that desperately wants to explore, yet being trapped, having to rely on others just to access the world around you, that is a profound loss of freedom. Which brings us to another great question. Does touching Sudha's feet challenge our traditional beliefs about who can actually be a teacher? So the crucial point is this. True education is all about the desire to learn, not the age of the instructor. A teacher isn't defined by their gray hair or their years on earth, but purely by their ability to impart knowledge. Ultimately, as the story shows us, the greatest achievement of the grandmother wasn't just learning the alphabet or learning to read. It was finding the courage to begin in the first place. Where there is a will, there is always a way. I really hope this explainer inspires you to remember that there is absolutely no age limit on learning and that knowledge truly does give a person wings to fly. Thanks so much for joining me today.